Good morning. It is Thursday, as a matter of fact, Thursday, the 3rd of January, and this is the drill. Thank you very much. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States of America today, because I'm the only one that makes the presumption for the status quo, talking to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. Is the NFL done? Are we through with that? Is the season over with? Because I'm sick of them. I've been sick of them for a number of seasons now, but particularly this year. I don't remember how it went last year, but it seems like every time I turn on the radio and I want to listen to something, instead of getting my regular programming, I got some stupid NFL game. I used to love the NFL. When I was a kid, I liked to pretend that I was a quarterback or a receiver, or a middle linebacker, or whatever. And I played some Pop Warner football, and that was about it in terms of my playing time. But I liked it, and now I can't stand it anymore, because one of the biggest reasons is because of the fact that the extortion that the owners try to perpetrate on the citizens of any given city. The so-called Los Angeles Rams is a classic example. A lot of people in LA were excited. The Rams came back. Wow, isn't this fantastic? Oh, we're going to have the Rams. And those people that are excited are idiots. They're morons. They deserve to have the Rams rob them of every nickel that they've got. The Rams, 10 years ago or so, went to the city of LA and said, and tried the extortion game. You're going to give us a new stadium, taxpayer expense, or we're going to leave. And much to the credit of the people of the city of Los Angeles, they all shrugged their shoulders and went about their business. So the Rams said, oh, you think we're bluffing? Here we go. And the big news story was nobody cared. Nobody cared. Nobody rushed out into the streets with placards and protesting and, oh, please keep the Rams, make the Rams stay. Nobody cared. Nobody cared. And part of the reason was that the Rams never won anything. They went to one Super Bowl, and that was it. They'd go to the playoffs many times, but they always seemed to manage to lose to either Minnesota or Dallas. But in any case, at least the people of the city of LA had the good sense to basically turn their backs on that stupid bit of extortion. So the Rams go to St. Louis, because St. Louis said, "Oh, come to St. Louis. We've got a place for you. We'll give you a stadium," and they did. And then what? 10 years later, what happens? The Los Angeles or the St. Louis Rams tell the people of St. Louis, well, we need a new stadium again, or we're leaving. And this time, these people of the city of St. Louis had the good sense to let them go, to wave goodbye. And so the Rams come back to L.A., but the only reason they come back to L.A. is because there's some businessman that was going to go ahead, that bought some property and decides he's going to build the ultimate stadium or whatever, a brand new stadium for the Rams. Then the San Diego Chargers, and as far as I'm concerned, that's who they are, the San Diego Chargers. They're not the L.A. Chargers, they're the San Diego Chargers. And pulled the same stunt on the people of San Diego. Give us a new stadium or we're going away. And instead of finding another city that doesn't have a team, no, they got to come to Los Angeles. And basically they're going to end up sharing the same stadium, this new stadium. So they don't give, none of these teams gives a rat's ass about the fans. The fans that are paying higher and higher and higher prices so that the multimillionaires on the field and the billionaires in the front office can get ever richer. I don't go to the games. I don't watch them on TV. I'm not going to listen to them on the radio. If I want to watch football, I'll watch college, at least as long as they're not getting paid. If we ever get up to a point where the NCAA relents and starts giving compensation to these players, then I'm done with them as well, because then we're probably going to have the same spectacle. USC is then going to try to find a stadium, get a stadium deal and move away and make all kinds of threats or whatever. But as long as they're college and they're not paid, they're amateurs, I'll watch them. And I have the same issue with other sports, baseball. And part of it, like I said, is the stadium issue. But the other part that goes across all sports is the idea that the players are going to get paid outrageous salaries, and they're not getting paid by the owners. They're simply getting paid by the fans. The fans are the ones that have to pay higher and higher and higher prices. $20, $40, $50 for parking, $50 for a hot dog, $100 for a beer. Of course, it isn't quite like that yet, but that's the direction it's going. So they try to dress everything up and say, oh, well, let's sell sushi, so we can kind of make it seem like this is some kind of a first-class experience. While in the meantime, you got to watch yourself when you go out in the parking lot, because you never know if some thug is going to beat you into oblivion, like what happened to the San Francisco Giants fan at the hands of a couple of, not Dodgers fans, just a couple of thugs dressed up as Dodgers fans. As far as I'm concerned, they should have spent the rest of their life in prison. I don't remember what sentence they got. But so there you go. And you're paying ever higher prices. You're not even safe in the damn parking lot. And we're supposed to continue to do this? We're supposed to continue, the owners continue to give outrageous amounts of money because all they're doing is playing a damn game. They're playing a game. That's all they're doing. And they're getting paid tens of millions of dollars a year. What it should be, the way it should go is cap it, $50,000 a year. You want to be a football, baseball player, whatever, all you're going to get from the fans is $50,000. If you want more money than that, go out and make a shoe deal. Go out and sell your shirts. Go out and sell uniforms or whatever and take a cut of that. Fine. Then if there's idiots out there that are willing to spend $200, $300, $400 for your helmet with your signature on it, then that's on them. If there's a stupid-ass company that's willing to pay you $10 million a year to endorse their shoes, again, that's on them. But I don't want to, as a middle-class person, have to go to, and I want to take my family to the game. I don't want to have to go through all that. Again, the huge expense, and then once you get there, it's not worth it. To watch a bunch of millionaires running around the bases or running up and down the field to score a touchdown? No. It's just not worth it. So NFL, I think it's going into the playoff mode now, but I can't wait to be rid of it. I'm just sick of it, and the sooner it's gone, the sooner it's over with, the better, as far as I'm concerned. In any case, to get more to the issues at hand, and the Nancy Pelosi's and her ilk, supposedly Nancy Pelosi's they're, I guess, pretty confident she's going to be voted in as Speaker of the House. And so she's going to be taking over with the Democrats. And I don't see that there's going to be a whole lot getting done in the next 2 years, one way or another. The only thing I can see getting done is possibly judges, confirmations, and that type of thing. But as far as spending bills and the priorities of the Democrats, I just don't see it happening. The interesting thing is going to be how are things going to go? Because the key is the 2020 election, of course. Whether or not President Trump gets reelected, but also whether or not the Republicans keep the Senate, and whether or not the Democrats can hold on to the House. So we'll have to see exactly how that goes. But that's the setting up to be the dynamic here. And so today I'm going to be reading from Ayn Rand's Lexicon. I'm also going to be reading from The 13 Rules for Radicals by Saul Alinsky, and The Rules for Radicals Defeated when I come back. Thank you very much, and welcome back. The Ayn Rand Lexicon is a list, alphabetical list of some of the important concepts that she deals with in her books and writings. And so she gets to the essences of these concepts, and that's what makes them worth knowing about. So the concept of the day today is draft. Of all the statist violations of individual rights in a mixed economy, the military draft is the worst. It's an abrogation of rights. It negates man's fundamental right, the right to life, and establishes the fundamental principle of statism, that a man's life belongs to the state, and that the state may claim it by compelling him to sacrifice it in battle. Once that principle is accepted, the rest is only a matter of time. If the state may force a man to risk his death or hideous maiming and crippling in a war declared at the state's discretion for a cause he may neither approve of nor even understand, if his consent is not required to send him into unspeakable martyrdom, then, in principle, all rights are negated in that state and its government is not man's protector any longer. What else is there left to protect? The most immoral contradiction in the chaos of today's anti-ideological groups is that of the so-called conservatives, who posture as defenders of individual rights, particularly property rights, but uphold and advocate the draft. By what infernal evasion can they hope to justify the proposition that creatures who have no right to life have the right to a bank account? A slightly higher, though not much higher, rung of hell should be reserved for those liberals who claim that man has the right to economic security, public housing, medical care, education, recreation, but no right to life, or that man has the right to livelihood, but not to life. One of the notions used by all sides to justify the draft is that, quote, rights impose obligations, unquote. Obligations to whom? And imposed by whom? Ideologically, that notion is worse than the evil it attempts to justify. It implies that rights are a gift from the state and that a man has to buy them by offering something, his life, in return. Logically, that notion is a contradiction. Since the only proper function of a government is to protect man's rights, it cannot claim title to his life in exchange for that protection. The only obligation involved in individual rights is an obligation imposed not by the state but by the nature of reality, i.e. by the law of identity. Consistency, which in this case means the obligation to respect the rights of others if one wishes one's own rights to be recognized and protected. Politically, the draft is clearly unconstitutional. No amount of rationalization, neither by the Supreme Court nor by private individuals, can alter the fact that it represents, quote, involuntary servitude, unquote. A volunteer army is the only proper, moral, and practical way to defend a free country. Should a man volunteer to fight if his country is attacked? Yes, if he values his own rights and freedom. A free or even semi-free country has never lacked volunteers in the face of foreign aggression. Many military authorities have testified that a volunteer army, an army of men who know what they are fighting for and why, is the best, most effective army, and that a drafted one is the least effective. And I'm going to stop it there. It goes way on and on and on and on. And basically she's wrong, because she starts, like all idealists, from the position of asking herself not what is the status quo and what's wrong with the status quo, but she asks herself what is ideal. What is and this is where she has kind of libertarian objectivists, all objectivists have kind of a libertarian-esque leanings, because she's making basically the libertarian argument. Libertarians also say no draft, because what they're after is an ideal society, both objectivists and libertarians. Libertarians want the perfect society in terms of liberty, maximum or perfect amount of liberty, which each person gets to do whatever it is that they want, so long as they're not infringing on the rights of somebody else, so that there is absolutely no government coercion. It's a pipe dream. Nobody on their side has ever explained how this can ever be accomplished. And what's particularly interesting, there are politically both objectivists and libertarians null and void. Socialists are a power, they're a force, because they recognize and they advocate the use of force to achieve the perfect society. They recognize that that's going to have to happen. And libertarians and objectivists would need to use force, initiate the use of force, in order to achieve their perfect societies as well. The problem for them is that they refuse to do that. They will not advocate the use of force, and therefore they are politically null and void. They've got nothing, very few followers, and absolutely no political influence in this country. So that's where, again, where she starts from. Where she should be in, if she was, again, this is a problem, is that she's defending objectivism or promoting objectivism instead of promoting reality and the truth. And the reality and the truth is that we have a draft and have had a draft in this country for many years or decades. We don't currently run a draft, but it's not because it's been declared illegal or unconstitutional, but simply because they, back in, I think it was Reagan's day, back in the 80s, that's when they decided to go to an all-volunteer army and stay away from a draft kind of situation. And feeling that the morale of the troops would be far superior, that you get a better quality of person that's a volunteer rather than having somebody that's a draftee. The other, the problem with that, of course, is that what they did was, excuse me, the military started doing was offering incentives. Why would anybody volunteer to go to join the army? They're going to put a gun in your hand and tell you to go kill somebody. So in order to get people to volunteer, they started saying, hey, guess what? We'll give you money for college. Okay, we'll give you a career. Hey, we got all kinds of fascinating careers in the Army that don't necessarily involve directly going out and shooting and killing people, and they are very technically oriented, computer oriented, and so you can gain work experience, and you can go ahead and get some education while you're here. So welcome aboard. So problem with that is that people start joining for the wrong reasons. When the Iraq War, the first Desert Storm started to take off, there was a lot of people that decided they wanted to leave the military, run off to Canada. They basically wanted to desert, but didn't consider themselves deserters because their attitude was, and perhaps they had psychologically at least a good point, that they didn't join to fight. They joined in order to get an education and get some work experience as promised by the Army. The Army didn't say in their advertisements, yes, we'll give you education, we will give you money for education, we will give you experience, but at the end of the day, you're still a soldier, and if necessary, we're going to put that gun in your hand and you're going to go kill somebody. So, psychologically speaking, anyways, they had kind of a point there, and that's one of the drawbacks to having an all-volunteer Army. One of the good things about having a draft is, again, also the idea of fairness. You don't want a situation where that your army is filled up with, particularly the infantry, with poor people. The only people that end up joining the army then, ostensibly in an all-volunteer army, would be people of the lower economic spectrum. People that are rich or upper middle class don't need to go out and lean on the Uncle Sam to get a degree or to get work experience. They can get it without it. So that's another drawback to a volunteer army. So you're going to have people that are carrying the burden, carrying the water so the poor carrying the water for the rich, kind of a situation. And if this is a democratic republic, then, or a polity, perhaps would be a better way of putting it, then everybody should be shouldering the burden. And so the upside to a draft is making sure, ostensibly, that everybody, at least those that can't use political shenanigans to get out of it, but that the vast majority of people are going to be treated the same. So you're going to end up with people that are rich in the Army, and you're going to end up with people that are poor, middle class, of all economic spectrums, all making the same sacrifice. And that would be at least more democratic, if nothing else. So when I come back, I'm going to be reading from the 13 Rules for Radicals by Saul Alinsky. Thank you. Welcome back. And so what we were in this, Saul Alinsky was talking about how to use his tactics and put them into practical application, giving some examples. When we left, one example he'd given was having for when they were trying to get the city to acknowledge that it had racial problems, and this is back in the 60s and 70s. he came up with the idea that they should get a bunch of black people to eat a lot of beans and then go to an opera, because the opera house was the crown jewel of the community. So if you can have a bunch of people in there farting and disrupting the opera, and what are they going to do? They're going to arrest these people for farting, that kind of thing. So, and I had pointed out it's childish. Number one, and it still is based on, and you can only, it's a kind of trick you can only pull once. Okay, once people get the idea, okay, I got fooled, then it becomes fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. So you go in there and you fart it up, and maybe that's going to get people riled up, but as soon as they understand that they're being manipulated, they'll simply suffer in silence, or put on a gas mask, or cover their noses, or whatever that is that they're going to do. And once the perpetrators don't get what it is that they're looking for, again, they're going to become demoralized and want to go back to work and go back to their normal, regular lives. So that's what I mean when I'm saying that the socialists in this country make their progress on the backs of Republicans, on the backs of conservatives. It is Republicans and conservatives that concede to the demands of the left that give the left their progress, because the left can't make any progress on its own. But to the book. The pressure that gave us our positive power is a negative of racism in a white society. We exploited it for our own purposes. Let us take one of the negative stereotypes that so many whites have of blacks, that blacks like to sit around eating watermelon. Suppose that 3,000 blacks suddenly descended into the downtown section of any city, each armed with and munching a huge piece of watermelon. This spectacle would be so far outside of the experience of the whites that they would be unnerved and disorganized. In alarm over what the blacks were up to, the establishment would probably react to the advantage of the blacks. Furthermore, the whites would recognize at last the absurdity of their stereotype of black habits. Whites would squirm in embarrassment knowing that they were being ridiculed. They would be the end of the that would be the end of the black watermelon stereotype. I think that this tactic would bring the administration to contact black leadership and ask what their demands were, even if no demands had been made. Here again is a case of doing what you can with what you've got. Another example of doing what you can with what you've got is the following, quote, I was lecturing at a college run by a very conservative, almost fundamentalist Protestant denomination. Afterwards, some of the students came to my motel to talk to me. Their problem was that they couldn't have any fun on campus. They weren't permitted to dance or smoke or have a can of beer. I had been talking about the strategy of affecting change in a society, and they wanted to know what tactics they could use to change their situation. I reminded them that a tactic is doing what you can with what you've got. Now, what have you got? I asked. What do they permit you to do? Practically nothing, they said, except, we can chew gum. I said, fine. Gum becomes the weapon. You get 200 or 300 students to get 2 packs of gum each, which is quite a wad. Then you have them drop it on the campus walks. This was cause absolute chaos. Why, with 500 wads of gum, I could paralyze Chicago, stop all the traffic in the loop. They looked at me as though I was some kind of a nut. But about 2 weeks later, I got an ecstatic letter saying, it worked. Now we can do just about anything so long as we don't chew gum. Quoted in Marion K. Sanders, that was unquote, quoted in Marion K. Sanders, The Professional Radical, Conversations with Saul Alinsky. As with the slum landlords, one of the major department stores in the nation was brought to heel by the following threatened tactic. Remember the rule, the threat is often more effective than the tactic itself, but only if you are so organized that the establishment knows not only that you have the power to execute the tactic, but that you definitely will. You can't do much bluffing in this game. If you're ever caught bluffing, forget about ever using threats in the future. On that point, you're dead. There is a particular department store that happens to cater to the carriage trade. It attracts many customers on the basis of its labels as well as the quality of its merchandise. Because of this, economic boycotts had failed to deter even the black middle class from shopping there. At the time, its employment policies were more restrictive than those of the other stores. Blacks were hired for only the most menial jobs. We made up a tactic. A busy Saturday shopping date was selected. Approximately 3,000 blacks, all dressed up in their good church-going suits or dresses, would be bussed downtown. When you put 3,000 blacks on the main floor of a store, even one that covers a square block, suddenly the entire color of the store changes. Any white coming through the revolving doors would take one pop-eyed look and assume that somehow he had stepped into Africa. He would keep right on going out the store. This would end the white trade for the day. For a low-income group, shopping is a time-consuming experience. For economy means everything. This would mean that every counter would be occupied by potential customers, carefully examining the quality of merchandise and asking, say, at the shirt counter about the material, color, style, cuffs, collars, and price. As the group occupying the clerk's attention around the shirt counters moved to the underwear section, those at the underwear section would replace them at the shirt counter, and the personnel of the store would be constantly occupied. Now pause to examine the tactic. It is legal. There's no sit-in or unlawful occupation of premises. Some thousands of people are in the store shopping. The police are powerless, and you are operating within the law. This operation would go on until an hour before closing time, when the group would begin purchasing everything in sight to be delivered COD. This would tie up delivery truck service for at least 2 days, with obvious further heavy financial costs, since all the merchandise would be refused at the time of delivery. The threat was delivered to the authorities through a legitimate and trustworthy channel. Every organization must have 2 or 3 stool pigeons who are trusted by the establishment. These stool pigeons are invaluable as trustworthy lines of communication to the establishment. With all plans ready to go, we begin formation of a series of committees: a transportation committee to get the buses, a mobilization committee to work with the ministers to get their people to the buses, and other committees with other specific functions. 2 of the key committees deliberately included one of these stoolies each, so that there would be one to back up the other. We knew the plan would be quickly reported back to the department store. The next day, we received a call from the department store for a meeting to discuss new personnel policies and an urgent request that the meeting take place within the next 2 or 3 days, certainly before Saturday. The personnel policies of the store were drastically changed. Overnight, 186 new jobs were opened. For the first time, blacks were on the sales floor and in executive training. This is the kind of tactic that can be used by the middle class too. Organized shopping, wholesale buying, plus charging and returning everything on delivery would add accounting costs to their attack on the retailer and the ominous threat of continued repetition. This is far more effective than canceling a charge account. Let's look at the score. 1. Sales for the day is completely shot. 2. Delivery service is tied up for 2 days or more. And 3. The accounting department is screwed up. Total cost is a nightmare for any retailer, and the sword remains hanging over his head. The middle class, too, must learn the nature of the enemy and be able to practice what I have described as mass jujitsu, utilizing the power of one part of the power structure against the other part. The thing that I was thinking about while reading this, and this, first of all, is that this was a different time. Yes, there was injustice, a tremendous amount of injustice as compared to today. Today, most of the injustices are more minor and individual. You're more likely to be served injustice by an individual than you are by a city, a department store, the federal government, etc. Whereas back in the 50s and 60s, it was common for the federal government, state government, city government to discriminate against people and treat blacks and Hispanics as second, third, fourth, fifth class citizens. Okay, so he has, righteousness is on their side in terms of trying to get the cities and department stores to change their policies. And sounds, again, like it was a very effective tactic. I think one of the things to take away from it is, number one, realize that what he said about the threat. And today what you end up having is you don't have the people that like Saul Alinsky, who, again, he said you got to be prepared to follow through and complete your and do what you have to do. If in other words, they were organized and they were ready to go to that department store and put people in place and make this happen and make the orders and the whole thing. But by letting people, the stoolies, as he put it, go back and report to the department store what was going on, then it becomes the threat. And the threat in this particular case had more power than, had enough power to get the job done, and they didn't need to follow through. Today's activist is all bluff. It's all bluff. They don't want to get organized. They don't want to spend the money, time, and energy. Look what he was talking about in terms of getting this organized. Committees. He might have a dozen different committees to take care of all the different things, getting bus transportation, getting the people organized, getting them dressed up, making sure they get to the buses on time, and blah, 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 blah. All the different things that they have to do, the logistics of it. And today's radical doesn't want to do that. Today's radical likes magic. They like to utter a statement, a sentence, make a threat, and have that threat, a statement, that sentence move somebody. Here, one classic example is the guy, the teenager, I think he was 14, 15 years old, who got the state of California to ban the use of straws, at least under, you can't have plastic straws automatically given to you in a sit-down restaurant. That's the law in California as of this year. So, and if they're served automatically, then the server can be fined $1,000. And the reason for it was a picture was taken of a turtle or a sea turtle, right, with a straw wedged in its nose. So apparently this straw had gotten into the ocean ostensibly, and the sea turtle had somehow managed to get this straw wedged in its nose. I don't believe it. I think that the photograph was staged, but I can't prove it. But the point is, then right after that, this ends up on social media, and then the state legislature starts taking up legislation to ban drinking straws. Again, so no organization was necessary. And it was almost anti-socialistic, because what you also notice with Saul Alinsky is organization. Getting dozens or hundreds of people involved in a particular movement, in particular social and political goals. Whereas today, it's very often an individual that is making most of the making things happen. David Hogg, I believe is his name, is a student in Florida that is dealing with gun control. Comes out and so he becomes kind of the face for gun control. It isn't about a movement. It's not about all the students that he's having to rally, to go to a department store, to order things COD, et cetera, et cetera. It's just him going on the talk shows and lecturing everybody. And but anyways, it also, the big point I wanted to make about this is that the big weakness of what Saul Alinsky is promoting is that these are tactics that anybody can employ. These are not tactics that are exclusive to the left. These are not tactics that just belong to the left. The right can use them as well. How many times have we been in a position, conservatives, where we've had, let's say, the the law about same-sex marriage and how it affects small businesses, cake bakers, for instance. So there's an injustice that's going to be done there. Why not use the same Saul Alinsky tactics to protest that decision as what Saul Alinsky was protesting in the 60s? You could do the same thing. Go out and get big wads of gum. Go out and feed people beans. Go out and get them dressed up and send them into grocery stores. Whatever the situation is. So those kinds of tactics can be used and have been used in certain areas, especially in abortion, where you have had nonviolent protests of abortion clinics surrounding the clinic in hopes of shutting it down, harassing women that are going into the clinic to get abortions, et cetera, et cetera. So, but that's the biggest weakness of the Alinsky model, is it's a model that can be used by anybody. So when I come back, it's going to be the Rules for Radicals Defeated. Thank you very much. Welcome back. And so where we were leaving this off last was about the morality of the Alinsky tactics, means, ends, and morality. With the use of such ruthless tactics, how can we beat them without becoming them? The Alinsky tactics create a quandary for conservatives, particularly those who look to their faith for a sense of morality. To many on the right, their standards of morality would conflict with some or all of the Alinsky tactics. And that's what I was trying to make the point, is that Saul Alinsky was not just protesting for the sake of protesting. He was protesting at the time, 60s and 70s, legitimate. He was taking up legitimate grievances. The fact that some of our citizens were being treated as less than, and preferential treatment was given to other of our citizens, and that's wrong. And so he had righteousness on his side. There's nothing wrong with exercising authority. Exercising power is a different matter. When Saul Alinsky is righteous in what he's trying to do, then he's exercising a certain type of authority. It may not be a legal authority, but it certainly is a moral or ethical authority. Back to the book. Let's see. To the many on the right, their standards of morality would conflict with some or all of Alinsky's tactics. Nonetheless, the tactics are effective and result in the election of people who will then be empowered to make decisions that are likely to influence the moral direction of the nation. Therefore, either way, conservatives seem to be compelled to make some sort of moral sacrifice for the greater good. This is exactly the type of conundrum that Alinsky would enjoy. The idea that you would have to make a moral decision based upon accepting one evil to avoid another is exactly the type of notion that Alinsky would use to support his moral argument for his at-any-cost philosophy of revolution. However, do conservatives really have to make such a choice? I would argue they do not. Instead, we can find a way to defend against the tactics and use the tactics only when necessary, and only to the extent to which they do not betray our sense of morality. Very good. I will also present 20 principles that can be used to defeat the tactics without moral capitulation. In the words of Alinsky's biographer, quote, Alinsky would not hesitate to use anything at his disposal, and the ends definitely justified the means. He used a community center in the BYNC, Backyards Neighborhood Council, where children being fed as a way to both hold power of the people and to position himself to be on the side of the needy and downtrodden. Alinsky found himself arguing with those in his own movement. Many believed it was a good idea to march and demonstrate, but felt that other means were inappropriate. You'll recall that, quote, any means necessary, unquote, was a common war cry during the 60s, and there were those who sought more militant means to stop the war in Vietnam and usher in an era of free love and peace, not unlike prevailing thought within the counterculture of the 1960s. The Occupy Wall Street crowd of today would do well to heed the words of Alinsky when he said, quote, throughout American history, every issue involving power and its use has always carried in its wake the liberal backlash of agreeing with the objective but disagreeing with the tactics, unquote. In defense of his ends justify the means approach, Alinsky presents a rather convoluted argument for the seeming lack of morality in his methodology. He borrows from differing and often conflicting philosophies and sources of morality and ethics. He's quite comfortable quoting from conflicting sources. He found it without contradiction to quote Thomas Paine and simultaneously give an over-the-shoulder acknowledgement to Lucifer in the dedication of Rules for Radicals. He quotes from Mao and Benjamin Franklin with equal ease. The mere mention of the word philosophy will have the eyes of many readers glassing over, so I'll make every attempt to avoid a more traditional exegesis of the ethical philosophy of Alinsky methods, and stick to a more practical explanation. I will not sacrifice the correctness of the solutions for the sake of simplicity. I'm not dumbing down the moral considerations, nor am I avoiding the more difficult points. I'm making every attempt to keep things both accurate and practical. For those who wish to pursue a more in-depth study of the moral philosophy involved in our discussion, the terms moral dualism, relativism, actual consequentialism, deontology, and Kantianism should give you a good start in the right direction. Of terms mentioned above, I would like to single out consequentialism because it so clearly defines Alinsky's main school of thought as pertains to his philosophy of ethics. Technically, we would classify Alinsky's philosophy of ethics concerning his proposed methodology for change and revolution as actual consequentialism. which is a branch of classical utilitarianism. Consequentialism is defined as, quote, a theory that asserts the normative properties only depend on the consequences. For example, the moral rightness or wrongness of an act depends on the consequences of that act, or the justice or injustice of the act depends on the consequences of that act, unquote. And the definition of actual consequentialism states, quote, that an act is morally right depends only on the actual consequences of the act, rather than any foreseeable, intended, or expected consequences, unquote. In other words, the end justifies the mean. Alinsky devotes an entire chapter to means and ends in his book, Rules for Radicals. Why would he devote so much time to a philosophical discussion? The answer is simple. In order to lead his readers down a pathway that appears to be fraught with ethical conflicts and lacking moral direction, he must first convince them that he has an answer to the obvious questions that will arise. He knew that it was outside of the norm for most people to turn to ridicule as a legitimate way to argue a moral case. Likewise, he knew that most people would find it objectionable to target a single individual and systematically dismantle his or her entire life in order to tie them to an opposing organization or train of thought in order to defeat it. In the same manner, many of Alinsky's tactics hinge upon the notion that the ends justify the means, and so Alinsky must establish the legitimacy of this consequentialism as the moral basis for his proposed methods. So I'm hoping that this is going to give a little bit more clarity in terms of appreciating the fact that what goes on in our society today has a lot more depth than what the pundits, what the Rush Limbaughs and the Sean Hannitys of the world would have you believe. As far as they're concerned, it's all shallow. It's politics for the sake of politics, politics for short-term gain, etc. And it in reality is no such thing. And you must know that if you're going to be effective, if you're going to be able to defeat socialism and socialists. And it's going to have to be you and me that defeat it, because it's not damn sure not going to be the government, damn sure not going to be the politicians that are going to do it for us. So at this point, that brings us to the conclusion of another episode of The Drill. And until next time, thank you for listening and have a great day.